Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the B2B eComm Exchange. This is a Commerce Vision podcast where we discover stories of B2B e-commerce and beyond from across Australia and New Zealand. If you are interested in this kind of content, please make sure that you subscribe and make yourself aware of upcoming episodes of both the podcast and the newsletter. Our producer will put those links in the chat for you to do so. And today's guest is someone very special. I have a growth leader in the e-commerce space with an extensive resume, including major brands like Asahi Group, Treasury Wines, Nestle, and Cadbury Schweppes. Now she has her own consultancy, eCommerce Me, and she helps businesses with their e-commerce strategies, enablement tools, and process on their technology journey, as well as the integration piece and execution. Kate Muslayah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have someone as experienced and well versed as you on the podcast. I think maybe what would be good for
Thank you.
the visitors today is if you maybe give some background, expand a little bit on what I've sort of talked to, and then we can jump into some questions.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a pretty cross-functional career, let's call it. A lot of sales, marketing, digital, e-com. So kind of have a broad capability, let's say, that I can help businesses with. And so I think one of the things that I love to do is help businesses with that entire journey. So from strategy through to enablement and tools and technology and even integration. I think one of the key things these days is around omni-channel. So being able to help them with that as well and bridge that gap for the best possible customer experience or brand experience across the entire omni-channel, not just in the digital world, but bringing digital and physical together.
Lovely. Now, I might make a note to let everyone know if you have any questions for Kate or myself in the series today, please put them in the chat and we'll work through them amongst the other conversation we have. So I guess what I'd like to sort of begin with, Kate, really is in our roles, both in sort of a vendor aspect and, a consultancy in your side, we're both really problem solvers in this space. I'm keen to sort of
Yeah.
understand your thoughts on how do businesses identify those problems and then how do they start to understand those problems so they can act on them?
Yeah, and I think problems is a really challenging one for a lot of businesses, right? Because there's a lot of pressure on businesses at the moment with
Mm,
cost pressures and sales pressures that come with that because consumers, be they B2B or B2C, are really challenged with their costs at the moment. So I think being able to identify problems is really important. And I think what I've seen certainly is a lot of businesses focus on symptoms rather than problems. And one of the keys, I think, is businesses at the moment, because of that, are being a bit reactionary rather than proactive. So they're being a bit reactionary and they're focusing on those symptoms. And I think things like they might be focusing on the symptom of sales is declining, and then they jump immediately to let's create a marketing campaign to drive acquisition of customers, again, be they B2B or B2C, rather than going, what's actually causing our sales to decline? Is there something wrong with our product? Is there friction in our systems? Is there friction in our processes? So really being able to delve into the why behind things first. I think the other thing with problems that I've certainly seen within businesses is every function, I guess every team within every function has their own sort of objectives and ways that they work and the like.
mm,
And there's sometimes a disconnect between, say, for example, a sales team and a administrative team around expectations and delivery and why things should be done. And I think for businesses being really curious around and different teams being curious around why things can or can't be done and met in terms of expectations, I think is crucial. I had an example the other day from a business where a sales member needed to get access to invoices for a customer because they hadn't paid some of their invoices. And it took the finance team about 17 different steps that they had to go through various systems and the like to actually access all of that stuff. Whereas if they had something like a technology which could solve that problem for them, or more of an automated process or a self-service process for that sales member, then they wouldn't be getting upset with the finance team. The salesperson would be able to do that themselves, and potentially even the customer would be able to access that themselves. So I think businesses, in terms of problem solving, really need to be clear on what is the problems that they're trying to solve, and really delve down into what are the different ways that they can solve them, and not just kind of putting band-aids on things. One of the things I love about this space is technology can be a real enabler of that. But making sure you have the right technology is crucial as well. So I have seen as well examples where businesses jump into, we need to get a website, and they don't really, they haven't really identified the problem that a website is going to solve. And it can definitely be the right solution for certain things, but it's not the only solution. I think there's fundamental process things that businesses often need to get right before they jump to that stage. So doing the pre-work before they jump to, let's get a website and potentially let's go to this one particular vendor that we have heard of somewhere. I think doing their homework around that why beforehand is really crucial to solving any problems in businesses.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like
What's
that.
your thoughts?
I say it reminds me of that age-old adage, symptoms over problems, as you mentioned. You focus on the prevention rather than the
Yeah.
cure, right? So, given that you sort of, there's so many wonderful things you've already said so far. How do you begin to start looking at helping businesses identify those problems? Are they sort of common? You sort of have a few touch points that you say, these are the likely areas I begin to look in to start understanding what your specific problems are, or is it just unique every single time?
I think it's quite unique for each individual business, right? There's some general things, there's some general, I guess, steps that you would go through in terms of some sort of brainstorming or workshop initially to try and uncover what those areas are. Businesses are pretty good, I think, at seeing what some of their macro problems are. So, for example, we don't have enough sales or sales are declining, kind of a macro problem. But then I think one of the challenges they have is identifying what's causing that. And so I think one of the things that I like to do is get cross-functional teams. So not just if in that example, not just the sales team, but cross-functional teams, and potentially even customers as a part of that engagement to really understand what's driving that. Because then once you can understand, X, Y, Z is driving it, you can drill down into. And there's Amazon have this technique in AWS where they call it the 5 whys. And so you look at, what's the problem, and then you keep drilling down. Is that the root cause? No. Is that the root cause? No. And so you keep drilling down until you get to a true root cause that you can actually then identify and solve. And I think this, where I see this most successful within businesses is where they have a really positive mentality about problem solving. So rather than blame sort of culture of, oh, there's a problem here, someone created this. It's a real, like, there's a problem here, let's figure out how to solve it, and let's figure out why it's happened, and actually figure out how to solve that why, rather than focusing on Sharon in accounts didn't do her job or something, which is often what happens. So I think there's a real there's a real desire though of businesses to get more out of what they do with being able to solve problems. And I think, like I said before, technology that can really help to simplify and unify processes as much as possible. And so much of, particularly digital and eComm, I find so much of it is around what's the manual process that you have now, and how can a system potentially improve that, and how can a system or some sort of technology enhance that. And I think particularly in a B2B space, how does that work in an omni-channel sense? Because sales teams and physical sales teams are actually really important in a lot of B2B scenarios. It's really important to have that connection with your customers. But how can technology and e-commerce in particular, how can it help and amplify that, and how can it complement that as
Yeah.
well?
I don't know if the audience can see I'm taking notes. I'm learning from you as we speak. So this is valuable to me as well, right? One thing that stood out to me that I really like what you mentioned is that alignment of teams. I think that's critical to mention, because that's, to me, what I've seen in the past. be a very, very strong driver of success for any project if you have everyone on the same journey.
Yeah.
There's buy-in, they're all committed, and they all get an outcome from going through the process together. So I think that's a really wonderful call out that you mentioned at the beginning of a process where you do your discovery. In terms of, I guess, another thing that I think was really nice what you talked to is that businesses understanding what their manual process is first and foremost then allows them to get the most out of that technology, because I often see myself when a business wants to implement, say, automation technology or streamlining their workflow process,
Yeah.
they think we switch it on and the problem's gone, which maybe isn't the case. Maybe you could talk to some of the experience you've had in that space as well.
Yeah, and it's funny because I see that a lot as well. And as one of the important things I think around any technology and putting technology in is actually mapping that process beforehand. So manually mapping that process, which sounds pretty boring for a lot of people. Some people find that really exciting, but mapping that process manually first, so you actually know what all the steps are, that, and not just what you think they are, but the people who are actually using the existing or completing the existing tasks, actually mapping what those processes are, because I think that then really helps to understand the whole process and all the various steps that things go through. But also, I think it helps to really identify, is technology going to solve these problems? And then what, because technology can also create more problems, right? So I think it helps to really process map that and create the flow so that these are the 7 steps we go through currently. And if we put in a system, it's going to take out or it's going to automate this part and this part, but we're still going to have to do this part. So I think being able to map that and then map it against any technology or system that you're going to bring in or automation that you're going to bring in can really help to make sure that that's successful. But I think you were right in terms of that cross-functional team, getting cross-functional teams engaged in this, and making sure they're all across it. And I think one of the things probably I missed within that is being really clear as a business around what your goals or objectives are for anything, right? But particularly when you're looking at technology, new technology, or changing processes and systems, being really clear and upfront and I guess open with your teams around why. And one of the things I've seen in businesses as well is, and particularly when it comes to technology, is nothing is foolproof. There's always things that can happen. There's always errors, and having a upfront sort of risk assessment that you've done to say these are all the possible things that could happen when we launch a new technology, and these are the actions that we would take if they do happen. And I think being clear with teams that potentially are impacted with that to say, we knew that this could happen, and this is what we plan to do if that happened, and this is the steps that we plan to take. And I think having that almost that risk assessment done in advance really helps to make it easy when you're in that process too. And it can be quite stressful if you're going through a migration to a platform, say for example, it can be quite stressful. And so having those steps that you can take that you've all agreed beforehand, if this happens, this is what we're going to do, I think really helps businesses to all be on the same page and reduces some of that stress level as well.
Yeah, I like that. You sound like a very process-driven person. I'm very similar. I'm all about lists and structure and understanding what we're trying to achieve. I think what you mentioned about being clear on the goals is very important. Understanding what the outcomes are intended to be off undertaking a project in a digital space, and then I think also what I like is really a metric of what does success look like at the end of this. Like, how do we know that we've been
Mm.
successful and achieve what we're trying to achieve? Are there any, you've touched on sort of throughout the few things that we've discussed so far, steps if people are reading between the lines that they could take themselves and start to do in their process? Are there any sort of actionable sort of takeaways or a high level, maybe a 5-step type process we could share with the audience to start considering if they're on this journey or about to go through this process?
Um, there's lots of different frameworks, to be honest, and I think some of that depends on the business. But I think the first thing really is to um, that I would suggest is have a session with your teams around, like, gather the data first. So kind of spend the time to actually gather the data to figure out what is the problems that you're trying to solve and what are the objectives that we're trying to deliver, because that will really help to set the right agenda and set the right agreed deliverables, like you say. I think then it's really doing that process map part and understanding that all the different processes or the process that you're trying to solve for a particular area or function, and having those clear so that you understand how something new or something different is going to enable those. I think then also that risk process, so doing that risk assessment as a part of that as well. If we do this, this is what could happen, and this is the possible options that we would take if this scenario occurred. And then I think being able to engage people throughout that process, so taking people on the journey. This is the step that we're at now. This is where we're going to. These are the things that haven't worked, because I think one of the misconceptions potentially that I see in the technology world, and I was like this myself from my previous sales days, but is you think that technology is going to solve everything as well. And so I think helping teams to understand that sometimes technology also goes wrong. It's not fail proof. And so being able to say, yep, this went wrong, and that's okay. We've planned for potentially things to go wrong. I've mitigated against it, but it's not the be all and end all, and it might just mean that things take a little bit longer. I think one of the other parts of the process that I think is really crucial as a part of that setup with your data is understanding what are those specific metrics that you want to measure, and what are those key things that you're trying to solve, so that you can actually create some sort of measure around it. So, for example, if the big challenge is you've got a sales issue, how are you measuring that post your new process or your new technology? How are you measuring that post that and during the process to show that it has actually delivered against that objective? I think that's really crucial as well. I think potentially one of the other steps that I like to take businesses through is a sort of continuous improvement thing. So yes, you've got potentially got to the end of the project, making sure you're reviewing that project to help you in any future ones that you're doing as well. So if you've gone through implementing an automation within your website, what worked well, what didn't work well, and getting that feedback from the various different teams around the process that you went through. Ironically, I'm not a process person, but I know that it helps you to make things work, right? So if you don't have it just can become really confusing, and people don't know where they're at and steps of things. So I think it helps you to make things work. And I think just so like coming back to that review post anything that you do, to make sure that the next time that you do something, you've captured all the things that potentially didn't work as well, so that you can make sure next time you're prepared for those or plan for those in that risk assessment. I
Yeah.
don't know if that helps with steps. It's not technically steps, but
No, I think it is. I think it definitely gives a guideline. Someone listening could absolutely take away what you're saying today and begin to consider the process for themselves in their own business. I think there's
yeah,
almost like a lot of experience you and I have had that probably are similar scenarios where you would go into a business and give them the guidance and the framework and what to consider. And then in my role, coming in and helping them on that journey to implement the solution that
yeah.
they're looking in a digital aspect. Given your comment around technology not being fail proof, but we see a lot of value in what technology can bring to our businesses in 2024, would you say that all businesses need some form of a digital product or tool in this day and age, or could you get away with not having digital in your business in 2024?
I think technically you could get away with it, but technology can make your life easier, right? So there's still businesses I know of that still do their finances on a spreadsheet, which is not technically the worst thing, but it requires a lot of people power. So you're investing a lot of human capital instead of technology to do something that technology could do. And I think particularly with the enablement of so many automation tools that are available within the market, there's ways that you can automate some of that stuff rather than having human capital invested in running finance reports, as an example. But I don't think that, I'm always, I guess, counsel businesses in terms of don't jump straight to technology. because if you've got a bad process to start with, technology is not going to fix that. You need to fix your process or the way that things are done first, or at least understand it so that the technology can assist it and help it and enable it, not be just another thing that people have to do that, creates more workload, not less. So I wouldn't say it's the be all and end.
That's a wonderful takeaway.
I wouldn't say it's the be all and end all, but I think it can really enable, you think about it from a sales team perspective, if they have all the access to their customers' information at their fingertips when they're out with a customer, and they can see what their past orders were, they can see the sorts of things they're engaged in, what they're looking at on a website, so they can see if they're looking at other products that they can then recommend to them. Like, that's all really useful information that someone can have to actually help create engagement, drive incremental sales, drive success. But if they've got a system where it takes them 10 steps to actually get through and process an order, then that's actually not helping them. It's actually making things harder. And then you'll find often in those businesses they'll revert to a manual process because it's easier.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think that's a massive call out. If there's one thing so far, I'm sure there's going to be wonderful takeaways that you say after this. But for me, that stands out, more than anything, understanding your process. And once you understand that, then you can map that to a tool that can improve that process. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really, really, huge for the audience today. Um, I think you've sort of touched on some of the tools and the capability, say having these information, putting it in the hands of your people to empower them so they can better serve your customers. If we dive in a little more specific around e-commerce and the tools that are available now, what are the sort of shifts that you're starting to see in how businesses are interacting with their customers using these digital tools?
I think there's some really exciting stuff, particularly in the B2B space happening. And I think people need to remember that B2B buyers are still consumers at the end of the day. So I think they want a consumer-led experience, because yes, they're buying for a business, but they're still a consumer. And so there's an expectation, I think, now, or certainly a shift now for B2B businesses to create really engaging digital experiences that, again, solve problems for those clients that they have. So there's a lot more digital engagement in both B2C and B2B, in all sorts of formats. So be that email communication, SMS communication, through social channels, as an example, through white papers and other sort of information that they can provide to people to help them as they're going through that journey, and potentially part of their acquisition strategy as well. I think there's also, I've seen a big focus, and I think there needs to be more and more of a big focus where it's relevant on omnichannel and that experience across the omnichannel, and trying to make that as seamless as possible. So, if you have a sales team, like a field sales team, for example, and they're out talking to customers, that your technology helps to enable them. But then the customer can also then find things for themselves on a website or on a portal that they can order for themselves, and you're making it seamless for them to order. So if they have I don't know, if they're a restaurant, for example, and they have a list of products that they purchase from your website, that you make it really easy for them to access that and reorder those products, because I think then it decreases that friction, which I think I see a lot more emphasis on businesses focusing on those areas, that full, I guess, omni-channel type of experience. I think there's also, within that, there's the ability to empower different teams and automate where possible. So there's a lot more automation that's happening, and that could be automating. If you think in a B2B sense, it could be automating suggestions. So you've seen that your customers come on and looked at all these different products that they don't currently buy. So could you then automate communication to them through email or other channels? Could you then send that to do you have technology to send that to the sales team who looks after that area, so that next time they're in, they could talk to them about those new solutions? Is there information that you can provide that client around uh, I'm trying to think of an example, but say it's a tool, for example. This is how this tool could be used in context of your business. So really driving down that personalisation space as well. How is X relevant to Y business? So I think in B2B space, that personalization is starting to become more important as well, because in some ways more so, I would say, in business and in consumer land, because in businesses, you tend to be more time poor. You've got 100 things you're doing as a buyer in 100 different areas. And so I think if you can help to streamline that process for them and provide them recommendations and tools that make it easy for them to do their job, that are really personalised to their particular business or their particular type of industry, then that is going to make things easier for them. Then they're more likely to do those things.
Yeah, I like that. I think that that's important, right?
Yeah, very much so. The other one I've seen is there's a real evolution in a lot of B2B spaces in the different route to market. So be they where it's delivered physically, whether it's delivered through some sort of marketplace, whether it's delivered through a wholesaler or a distributor type of arrangement. I think there's a greater explosion is not the right word, but expansion of choices that buyers can purchase through. And I think businesses being open to looking at where the buyer is buying, not dictating where the buyer is buying necessarily.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like we're on the same wavelength, Kate. I'm seeing all the things that you're talking to. Someone once said to me, "The more friction you remove, the more relevant you are." And I think that it's very powerful to think through what you were discussing, and what you just said then is really reaching the customer where they are. Right, you're not saying screaming at them, "Buy on my website, buy on my website." That's what that real sort of omni-channel experience you're talking to enables.
Yeah.
You're allowing the customer to buy in the way that suits them and how they want to do business with you. I think that's very important to put those kind of tools in place rather than force them down a path that you might want them to go down.
Yeah. And I think there's studies that have come out recently around digital in particular and purchasing, and that there's this real shift in the B2B space of buyers choosing to use digital channels, particularly to finalize that purchase, right? So it might not be for engagement, it might not be for learning, it might not be for business development or sort of growth, but for that purchase part of it, and the particularly purchase and invoicing and sort of credit payment and things. If you can reduce friction in those spaces, once you've had potentially a physical person go out or a digital communication go out or even a physical communication go out, if you can reduce that friction and make it really easy for them to transact, and then even if it's with credit, for example, credit type scenarios, and then pay their invoices, there's a whole lot of other functions internally that benefit from that too. So I think that's a really interesting space for businesses to look at how they can evolve with technology.
There's a lot of flow-on effects that you might not consider are
Yeah.
advantages or almost a side effect or byproduct of installing these tools. In terms of, when my head is going, there are so many different tools available to solve myriad of problems. What is your opinion around phasing the approach to which digital tools businesses start to take up, and then how much of a consideration do they need to take in terms of systems that play nice together?
I think if you look at it from any business, there should be a roadmap, right? You don't. I mean, you could do everything all at once, but that would be. I wouldn't want to be in that business personally.
Yeah.
But I think having a roadmap of, and this aligns back to what is your objective and goals, and how have you prioritized those. So if your first objective is we need to enable our sales team to have information when they're in the field or when they're with customers. How do you focus on that piece of some technology that can serve that purpose and delivers on that aspect? So, prioritizing and having those goals and objectives that prioritize the types of technology that you have. But I think you were right in terms of uncovering that having things that integrate well together makes things work easier for everybody, for technology, from the technology sort of side, from IT sides, from system sides. If you have technologies that integrate better together, things flow easier. It doesn't mean that there's always ways that you can make technology, I guess, work together most of the time. But having things that fit together well does make life a lot easier. And I think thinking about that in totality of, and this is where brainstorming can help, right? And having cross-functional brainstorming, because technology should be a lot around enablement. It shouldn't be adding a process for the sake of things just because it's technology, right? It should be around enabling, and helping people to make things easier and more streamlined. There's obviously a lot of buzz around with AI at the moment, be it Gen AI or sort of machine learning type AI. But I think all those types of tools are really around how do you help simplify or create efficiency or streamline things. And that has to be the real area that you're solving, maybe is the right way to phrase that. So I think really, yeah, anything that integrates together is definitely a plus. And that's where I think a lot of businesses sometimes look at jumping to the solution, which might be a website, or they think it's a website, and jumping to maybe a particular supplier within that space, rather than going, what does our tech stack look like at the moment, and what's going to fit nicely with that, rather than getting a website and then having to retrofit all the other components of it because they don't really fit nicely within that. And I think really doing that due diligence up front around what are the things that we what are the things that we have to do with this. Again, say it's a website. What are things we have to do with this website versus what are the things that are nice to have? So because that creates your roadmap as well. It might be that this website has to enable our customers to order for themselves, right? That's your primary goal of the website. So anything that you look at within technology has to allow for that to be the case. Your nice to have might be that our sales team can place orders on behalf of our customers. So when they're out in the field with the customer, they can do the order on their behalf. That might be a nice to have. So I think then that helps you to work out what technology solutions you could look at that enable both of those things, one in the short term and one in the longer term. But yeah, I think you nailed it on the head before, where it was integrations. Having seen many clunky integrations,
Yeah.
um, they can a process or and back to before when we were talking around making things harder. If you don't have the right integrations with your technology that you put into play, that can actually make things harder, can create more work for people, not less, which is ultimately the goal of technology, is to streamline and create less work, not more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We often see many businesses that are coming into digital for the first time, or finally seeing the value in these tools, often have systems that they've been running for 15 and 20 years that aren't necessarily ready for that transition. So, do you have any thoughts around what potential would be the first things for them to consider or look at, or any sort of systems in the way that they develop and adopt a tech stack? What is there a particular order that they should start considering tools in, or does my question make sense? I'm sort of just
Yeah,
thinking out
yeah,
loud.
it makes sense. I think it's very unique to each business. I think if you were going to do anything as a first stage, I think an ERP is probably the thing. So a system, I guess, that creates all of your main pieces of data, that sort of type system. And it doesn't need to be for an enterprise level. There's all sorts of scales that you can go through to this, but something that captures all of your main points of data as a business. So your product information, ideally your finance in the same system, that sort of stuff, I think is what I would focus on as a business first if I was setting up anything. But again, that would depend on the scale of your business. If you're a small startup, then a website might actually be the first thing that you look at, because you can manually do some of those processes in the back end, or the website can have functionality that enables um, product lists and enables product details and information. So I think it very much would depend on the size and the scale of the business, and where they're at in their journey, or where they're at in their sort of their life cycle, and what they have already existing. Because it's really hard if you've got a big integrated system already, like an ERP, to then try and um, get out of something like that, in terms of the change for your business is so huge, and can be so huge that it can be really overwhelming for a lot of people as well to change that thing. Because I think one of the things that I've seen where technology can potentially go wrong, and not because it's the wrong solution, is because businesses don't take people on the journey. They're just like, oh, we've got this new solution, here you go, see ya. and they don't really take them on that journey of why they're doing something, how it's going to help them, because humans by nature don't like change, right? We're silly in that way that most humans don't actually like change. They want consistency and they want comfort, particularly when you're working. You want to know you can come in and you can go into that system and it's going to do what you want it to do. And so then if someone changes that on you, you're like, I have to relearn all this stuff. I'm too old. Like, this is annoying. So I think having a good change management strategy that engages the teams that are going to be affected and even the teams around them, I think is really crucial as a part of any technology adaptation and any technology evolution.
Yeah, yeah, I like that a lot. I think you would probably have experience with businesses of all different sizes, right? I imagine, from your past experience through to, consulting that you're doing today, are there any businesses that technology can't create advantages for, or are there tools that suit businesses both small and large? Is this something that any business you see can take advantage of and streamline their process and reduce their cost to serve?
I haven't seen a business where technology can't help them. So I can't think of a business where technology can't help them because you think even just a small startup. So as an example, my daughter is doing resin art creation things at the moment, key rings and things. And even like a tiny little thing like that, a website is actually the easiest thing to do, or a social channel, which is digital channel, is the easiest thing to do in that circumstance. So I don't think there's any business at any scale where technology can't help them. But it's about having the right technology for the right reason to solve the right problems rather than just going, we need technology, we need a website. So I think it's really doing the thinking before and the understanding of that process mapping before you jump to straight to solution. Doing all that behind the scenes planning. And it's you probably see this in sales as well. In sales, often you learn it's all that planning that really makes the difference rather than just jumping to solutions for stuff. All that planning and understanding and being curious at the start is really what helps you provide the best outcomes. So I think that part is really crucial. But yeah, any business, any size, technology can definitely help streamline processes, can create efficiencies, can enable greater success, can allow access to information, and can really help engage and create great experiences across the entire omnichannel.
Yeah, there's many powerful things that you explained from streamlining the process, driving efficiencies, automating processes that can be quickly sort of scaled into a more reasonable structure, the customer experience, the importance of the planning. What
Yeah.
about when a person has done all the planning, they've gone through the motions, they're prepared for this project, and as you mentioned before, sometimes things go wrong. When does someone start to say it's time to pivot when the results aren't what we expected or things aren't working? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it would depend on the stage they're in. So if you're in the process of implementing a new tool and things don't go wrong, and this is where I think doing that risk assessment at the start should help you to figure out all of your what if scenarios so that you know what to do if something doesn't go to plan, because that happens in technology quite frequently. Um, so I think having that at the start is really crucial because then it makes it easy for people to make the decision. They're not really making a decision, they're just implementing what they've already decided. So I think that's part of it if you're on the process of putting in technology or new technology. I think if you're just starting with technology or you've gone through a process and it's not doing what you thought that it should do or it's not helping people, I think you've got to look at is it that you didn't fully understand the processes to start with? So then when you've put in this new thing, it's actually not solving some of those steps along the way. So is it that you could fix? Is it that is it a people thing in terms of have we not have we not done a good job in change management or process changes, and so people are not either not using the system or the system doesn't actually help them? Have we not increased their capability so that they understand how to do things and maybe if something's changed, how to do that or how to find it, and they're then not reverting back to potentially a manual process? I think there's also that post review that is really crucial in any technology to look at. Is it delivering to the objectives that we had? Is there tweaks or changes that we could make that help that? Because sometimes there could be an easy tweak or a change within a website that can enable, if it's not doing X, or it's not doing X as well as we thought. And I think that's where leveraging partners that you work with, for example, a partner who might implement a system, an agency, say, for example, who might implement a system with you. I think it's crucial to have that ongoing sort of relationship with them to understand and have those conversations around, well, these things aren't working. So, what are the options that we could take to either make them work within the existing system? Because it's really hard once you put a system in, and I think the bigger the business, the bigger the system, right? Generally, and it's really hard to then start to unwind that and go in a different direction. But I think if it's fundamentally um, taking people like a significant amount of more time to do their job, or creating greater angst and significant sort of stuff, greater angst and frustration and disconnect between teams, if it's slowing process down, if it's if you're losing customers or you're not getting what the system was supposed to do, then I think as a business you need to really take that hard look and figure out why that is. And is it something that is fixable within the system that you've created, or is it something that does need to be scrapped and you need to go back to the drawing board? And that's the case, which is a really challenging decision for a business to make. If that's the case, then how do we make sure the front end part, that planning part, is done really well before we even jump into something new, so that you are making sure that you're not going to just put something else in that's going to have the same challenges.
Yeah, well said. I think that's the fork in the road, like deciding quickly if it can be tweaked or adjusted to solve the problem that you need it to, or if it isn't a function of
Yeah,
that technology, accept that quickly and move to the next. So yeah, we often see many businesses that are very technology adverse after having a bad experience with a project, and
yeah,
second time
yeah,
round
very
they'll do
true.
a lot more of the planning. They'll be very methodical in what they need to know and understand. And I agree with you. I think it's very important that planning process, doing that upfront, helps with any pain as you and likely will experience it, because these are hard projects to undertake. Uh,
They are definitely. And I think one of the things that I've seen as well is um, technology is often not the primary business um, that the business that we're looking at for technology is in. So they don't necessarily understand it. They don't know what it can do. So they're really relying on the people that they're engaging with, be they agencies or consultants or whoever, to actually help them on that process. And I think there's a role for all of us in the industry that are on that side, whether they're technology providers, whether they're consultants, whether they're agencies, to really help businesses make sure that they've done that problem solving upfront and that they've really uncovered. Um, they've kind of really done that front end stuff, because then that will mean that there is more success with those projects, and it's delivering the outcomes that everybody wants. Because if you've got a happy customer as a consultant in my space, as a technology provider, if you've got a happy customer, they're more likely to recommend you anyway, particularly in the B2B world. So I think making sure that you help them with that process, rather than just going, oh, well, you didn't tell us that you wanted that, so sucks for you. I think really that's on all of us within this industry to really help businesses through that, because they're not technology businesses. That's why they're coming to technology people or agencies or whatever to help them on that process.
I love that you've called that out. That's wonderful to talk to. I think most certainly taking people on the journey and being a guide. I see quite often the best business that I come across is the word of mouth business, and when people have a great experience with you and you support them on that process, because rightly, as you've said, many of these businesses that are wholesalers and distributors and manufacturers, they're not tech businesses. They're so far removed from that space.
That's
So
right.
yeah, I think it's very
Yeah.
important to call that out. Yeah. You might have seen on the last episode of the podcast, we like to do a handball question. So it's a kind of little cool thing that we do, right? We did with Luke James on the last episode, where We get our guests to ask a question
Yep.
for the guests following them. So Luke has done that, and I believe our producer.
Yes. Thanks,
Yeah,
Luke, by the way.
I believe our producer's got a clip of Luke, so we might see if we can get that on the screen of Luke asking the question, and then I'd be keen to get your thoughts on what his question is.
Yeah, perfect.
I'd like to hear, knowing what we know today, after having come through COVID and seeing what that's thrown at us, if you were to start a business tomorrow, what would you focus on first? People, process, product? What would be the focus for you? That's what I'd love to hear. Because I think everyone has very different views on that, but it'd be very interesting to hear that from your next guest.
Nothing like throwing a really hard, like big, all-encompassing question. It's a funny one, right? Because I think they're all three of those things are really crucial in businesses. And I think particularly with small businesses, right? You know, you think about if you don't have great people and they're not happy, then you can create a toxic workplace. But if you don't have the right processes, things don't work, or you don't evolve problems and solutions. You know, and that leads to all these sorts of flow-on effects and challenges. But then if you don't have great products, people are not really gonna. They might come to you initially, but they're not going to come back and buy. So I think for a business kind of starting from scratch, I think it's really important to look at, I would probably think, particularly a small business, do you have the right product? And this is probably my marketing background as well, but do you have the right product to start with? Because at the end of the day, if the product is not right, nobody's going to come back to your business. No one's going to buy it. So I think having that right product to start with, but I think having that, it's almost like it is a holy trinity, right, of the three, but having the right product to start with, and then having the right processes or technology to enable that, because you can then build up the team that you have in the way that you want them to create the right experience that you want for your product and your brand and your business. So I would probably start with product first, making sure that's good. And again, evolving over time and having that mentality of evolution and progress, not perfection necessarily, I think is really crucial with that. But yeah, product, process, and then people. And not that people are the least important, they're probably the most important because they make or break stuff. But I think in terms of how you would set up your business, because small businesses as well, sometimes like me, you're a one-man band, right? Or a one-lady band. So I think sometimes you don't have the luxury of lots of people. So I think having the right product and then having good processes and then being able to evolve your team and add to that in the way that you want to represent your brand and your product and your company is how I would focus on that.
I like that.
How about you, Wade? How would you look at it?
I'm not supposed to answer that question, Kate. No. I think it's a hard one to answer, right? I think I agree with you in that product is very important, because if you have one of those three things misaligned, the other two don't function as well as they can. So if you have a great product
Yeah,
in place with a process that you understand that can be instilled into that product, and the people that understand it
yeah,
and drive
yeah.
it, then you have the holy trinity, as you say. So it's hard to sort of put one
That's right. Yeah,
above the other. Yeah. So I think Luke sort of put that
yeah,
against us just to see how we respond. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know I'm probably going to put you on the
yeah.
spot then, in terms of, I don't know if you've considered what kind of question you would like to ask to our next guest. Do you have anything in mind you'd like to pose as the handball question?
Yeah, I think probably for me, yeah, one around data. So data's, the new gold now, right? Everybody has all this data and all this information and often, and I think particularly in the world of digital and e-com, but they don't really know what to do to it. So I think my question would be around where should a business start with a data strategy? What's important to review? What's important to collect? How do you get the best out of that? And I guess how can technology and e-commerce tools in particular help enable a good data strategy and good outcomes of within that data space? That's kind of like seven questions in one, I think.
That's all right. I think Luke asked a few too, so that's good. We're on theme. No, I think that's a lovely question to pose. Yeah. Did you have any other things you wanted to sort of mention or call out, Kate? Maybe I haven't asked you, or things that we haven't got to.
um, I think coming back to what we'd said early on, but I think having a culture in a business where you are brainstorming, you're trying to proactively brainstorm around challenges that you have in a business so that you can help to solve those, I think is really key. And where possible, being able to process map what all the different things are that you do within a business, be they customers paying an invoice, be they how finance does XYZ, be they how a salesperson does XYZ. I think being able to process map those things so you actually understand what all the steps are. Because what I've seen as well within businesses, and I had a manager who, I don't even know if I can say this. Oh no, it's a digital thing, but who used to say assumptions are terrible, and that everybody has them, and everybody makes them within businesses, but they make an ass out of you and me because everybody has opinions and everybody has assumptions, but often they're not correct. So I think getting down to the facts and using, it's where data is crucial, right? But using facts rather than assumptions around stuff to make sure that you're actually solving problems and solving the right problems, I think is really crucial as people go on this journey. And that's what I like to do with businesses as well. I think I like to be a little bit of that agitator or that disruptor, but also help them with that understanding and with that curiosity to go, what's really causing this, and how can we actually help to solve that? And I think how can we what sort of enablement can we use, be they technology or processes or tools or capability building to solve that problem.
That's wonderful, Kate. I'm learning so much just from talking to you myself. So I'm hoping the audience have got quite a lot out of today's session. I'm very thankful that you've taken time out of your busy schedule to do this with me. It's greatly appreciated, and I'm sure
No worries at all.
in the next season, I'd love to have you back to talk and see what things have changed since we speak today. I didn't even get to any of the questions from people today. I'm very sorry if you guys have posted some questions. We will get to those on LinkedIn later, but I was just immersed in the conversation with you, Kate. So I'm very thankful that you spent some time with me, and I hope the audience
Nice,
got as
thank
much out of
you.
it as I did.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, and I think like I said, I love to help businesses on this journey. So if people are curious around what they should be doing or how they should be doing things, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or on my email, and happy to help people go through this process.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, guys, and look forward to catching you on the next episode of the eComm Exchange.
See you later.